edition of the program. Tonight we have an exclusive interview with Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, the latest political star, nominated by Nana Akuffo Addo to be his running mate for the second time. Dr. Bawumia has recently delivered a lecture on the state of Ghana's economy. The lecture has generated several commentary and discussions around the country from political actors and social people, including financial people as well. We are privileged to have Dr. Bawumia in the studio tonight. We'll hear from the horse's own mouth. What did he really mean by what he said? And we'll have a conversation with him on other matters. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for
So tell your friend to tell his friend, send a text message, send a BB messenger, send a WhatsApp. Dr. Bawumia is live on Good Evening Ghana after the break. Welcome back to the show. Doc, somebody may say that welcome to the game. The last time you were nominated close to the time and you went straight into the politics of the mass rallies and all of that. But this time you have had the opportunity to speak about what you think is the state of the economy, and the attacks have started coming. Is it welcome to the political game for you? How do you relate to these attacks?
Well, I think one has to take a step back to see why these attacks are coming. Basically, I gave a lecture on the state of the economy, and I think it seems to have touched a nerve as far as the government side is concerned, because they touted major achievements in the economic record, and I think the lecture essentially put that record in tatters. And I think people are quite upset, and they've gone out in anger to attack me, and very little of attacking the substance of what I'm saying. So it is the way politics is done. You target people, target personalities, but don't deal with ideas. But I'm going to continually focus on ideas in this campaign, and the issues I raised are very relevant and will continue to be so.
They have also responded substantively on the intellectual level. The Minister of Finance had a statement in the graphic, and I'll come to that in a bit. But
yeah.
For people like you who are either technocrats or people working outside the main political sphere, the concern has always been politics is a dirty game and that kind of thing. What kind of changes in our politics would you like to see now that you are in?
Well, I think even if I was not in, I would like to see changes in our politics to elevate the decency in our politics, to make politics a competition of ideas from different political parties. We essentially should think about a one Ghana concept. We are competing in the political space as part of the democratic process, but our competition is really with other countries outside Ghana, as I stated in my speech. Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, South Korea, Brazil, China, these are our competitors. And so we have to think about politics in a very different way from the way we've been doing it. I like to think about it as a black stars concept, that in Ghana, we have different players as part of a team. Some are engineers, some are doctors, some are nurses, some are business people. But in this global competition that we find ourselves in, all of these people, regardless of political party, are members of that team Ghana. And so we should really try to lift Ghana up and empower our team, our private sector, to really compete globally, because the competition out there is very fierce. And if we are going to create the type of economy that is going to create the jobs that we need to create, we've got to bring the talents and energies of everybody to bear. And therefore, whilst we are political, we don't want to be overtly so to the detriment of the very players in this team Ghana who will be scoring for the goals for us in the field of international competition. So I would rather people concentrate on, ideas. How are we going to change this country? how are we going to move this country, which has been independent for 55 years now, and we haven't solved very basic problems. Water is still a problem even in the capital city as we speak. Electricity, is still a problem. Without energy, there is going to be no industrialization. That is just a simple fact. So we've got to address, basic issues. Our inner cities, Choko, Nima, Aboboloshi, and all of that. Problems with just basic toilet facilities. This is the 21st century Ghana. So we need a new type of politics that moves us to address issues in terms of results, solutions to people's problems.
So you think the bygones should be bygones? From 2012 election, Dr. Bawumia wants us to rethink our politics. Is that the point?
Well, I think you can never forget the past, but I think the focus, the type of politics that we ought to be doing should be a politics of ideas, so a politics of solutions. You can sit on the radio all you want and insult all you want. It doesn't solve somebody's problem of getting water. So why don't we just focus a little bit more with ideas, with cooperation on how to solve some of these basic problems. Many countries have solved the problem of water, for example, over hundreds of years ago. 2/3 of the water pipes that run the city of London are over 100 years old. 1/3 of them are 150 years old. In Rome, we are talking of so many, over 1,000 years old in some of the lines. So you really, it's not an issue of the technology not being available. So we've got to understand why is it that we are not able to do some of these things that other countries have been able to do. And I believe very, very, very fervently that what other countries have been able to do, Ghana should be, and we can do it if we bring our talents to bear and stop this type of divisive and very detrimental type of politics where you tear people down simply because they've said something that you find quite disagreeable, and you don't attack their idea, but you go ahead and attack their person and try to reduce their credibility and all of that. For me, it doesn't matter to me. Those things don't get to me. Someone was saying to me, that the tradition that is attacking me, I shouldn't worry because they don't even give that respect to their own founder. So I'm getting off lightly. So I'm really quite
very well
quite,
said, though, Dr.
yes,
Bawumia,
yes,
very eloquently said. But
Mm.
they have called you dishonest. They said that as a technocrat from the Bank of Ghana,
Right.
following the economic processes in Africa,
Right,
you know about something called rebasing,
right.
and you presented a lecture that closed one eye to that because you wanted to paint a certain picture, and they say that you are a very dishonest economist. First of all, tell our viewers what is rebasing and when did it happen in Ghana?
Well, it's a rather amusing accusation because sometime around 2010, I think the idea, the work, I think some errors had been detected in the calculation of Ghana's GDP. And in those errors, it was recognized that Ghana's GDP from about 2006 was underestimated by about 60%. So the whole series had to be corrected from 2006. And essentially, you had a rebasing taking place of the GDP series from 2006. And essentially what the NDC is accusing me of is totally not at all the case. In fact, what I find amusing is that they were rather exactly dishonest in their presentation of their 29 budget, 2010 budget, 2011 budget, and 2012 budget as far as this particular issue is concerned.
So,
and I will explain.
So let me understand it. So the rebasing means that when we did that rebasing, we became a richer country? Is that what
Statistically. And this is what I pointed out in my lecture. That the rebasing increased our GDP by about 60% from 2006.
Was it an a guesswork increase? Was it
No,
estimated?
this was an error that was discovered, that we were not calculating our nominal GDP accurately, and so it was corrected. So it was. This is the true position.
Yeah, is it the amount of
this is our total
business
income
done in the country? Is that what it means?
The GDP is our total income, the
income that Ghana
has earned in terms of output that has been produced. So it's the total value of goods and services in Ghana.
So if I bought a yogurt on the street, does it add up to?
Well, it is in that GDP. It is
okay.
Expenditure, because when somebody produces, somebody earns an income, and that person earns an income, uses it to spend.
So
on
all
goods.
the incomes earned.
All the incomes earned. Yeah.
That's what is called GDP.
And that is total income for Ghana in terms of output. Okay. Right?
Does it include foreigners in Ghana? This GDP?
Well, yeah. In terms of whatever they spend here,
okay.
You would include.
Okay.
But what we are talking about is goods that are produced in Ghana.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, the foreigners.
So when it was
producing goods
underestimated, it means that they didn't calculate some of it.
Yes, it means that some of it was missing in the estimation, and it was discovered. In fact, some technical assistance was offered to Ghana by the International Monetary Fund to put this right, and it was put right. So exactly. So when you have a rebasing that has taken place from 2006 through, today, using rebase figures, it is very, very dishonest for any government, let alone the Ministry of Finance that has both sets of data, to go in and present data, to the country in Parliament in a very misleading way.
What was the source of the misleading?
Well, they were presenting data on deficits and debt ratios.
This is the budget.
The budget. Mm-hmm. Also in the State of the Union address of the President. They were saying that deficits in 2008 was 14.5%.
What is deficit?
Well, that is the gap between your revenue and your expenditure as a proportion
what you have
of your
spent that you didn't have.
That's right, okay. Precisely.
And
so you will have to borrow and finance it and so on. So they basically were 2009 budget, 2010, 2011, 2012. It's consistent misleading of the people of Ghana.
What did they present?
They presented a deficit figure of 14.5% based on figures that were not rebased, and compared them essentially to figures that were rebased. And now turning around to say that in my lecture I did the same thing. They are obviously masters of that, so they recognize that. But
the allegation then, just on the allegation to understand before you move on, the allegation then is that in the budgets of the government in 2009 and 2010 and 2011, they presented a deficit based on pre-rebasing figures.
Precisely.
So that if they had
it made it look,
rebasing, the deficits would have been lower.
Precisely, but they wanted it to look bad because they wanted the NPP to look bad in terms of the economic management. Okay. That was the reason why it was done. I mean, when I read it, I laughed at that time. I just laughed. But
just by reading it, did you know it was under rebasing?
Of course.
Just by reading
of course. I mean,
is it the figures?
Yes, because it was very clear what had happened. But getting back to my speech, and I want to touch on this because I made it very clear, and this is why I'm not quite sure where the attack on me is coming from. I made it very clear in my speech that you're using apples versus apples and oranges versus oranges. So I'll just read to you the part of my speech that deals with this rebasing issue, just if you don't mind. I said, with regards to government finances, and for those of you who have my speech, it will be on page 20. With regards to government finances, we recall that end 2008, as a result of the global financial crisis, the government budget deficit to GDP ratio stood at 6.5% into brackets after the rebasing of GDP, or 11.2% before the rebasing of GDP. This outcome was described by the NDC as bad fiscal management. By 2010, with improved external economic conditions, after claiming that the economic fundamentals had been restored, the government budget deficit to GDP ratio stood at 6.5%, that is rounding up, after rebasing, or 11.7% before rebasing, slightly higher than it was in 2008. So I asked the question, so where was the improved fiscal performance? You see what I mean? So,
Okay.
I mean, this is where I explain the rebasing, talk about some of the constraints in terms of the fact that it doesn't give you additional liquidity. It is a statistical increase. But I make a clear distinction in comparing the two periods, given numbers for the rebased fiscal deficit versus the unrebased deficit for both periods. So I don't understand where the accusation of dishonesty would come into play.
You're saying that you presented a comparative analysis
Precisely
of what it is. Okay.
Yeah. So
I think that's well said,
it's
and
very clear.
Perhaps
it's very, it's very clear.
Those who don't agree with you may come back. But
well, they should read.
There's
first.
a big issue about the NDC's achievements that that you sought to undermine, and it is about the inflation, the single-digit inflation. Now, Ghanaians had been introduced to the need for single-digit inflation actually by our Mahamudu's government in 2001, when the government talked about an ambition to attain single-digit inflation. It's been a big deal attaining single-digit inflation. We've heard it all the time. It appeared to have eluded us for a while. But the NDC say that they have achieved it consistently for 22 months. Certainly, that must be a good thing.
Well, as you know, I was part of a team at the central bank that was working on inflation targeting, and we put together an inflation targeting framework for Ghana. And it's very, very important for many countries to bring down inflation to low and stable levels, because it really brings down the cost of living. It brings down interest rates. It creates exchange rate stability and creates an environment where the cost of doing business is lower. Businessmen can plan with that stability in terms of their investment horizon and make investment decisions on that basis. So bringing down inflation to low single-digit levels is very important. And also job creation once you have this business environment improving and cost of doing business improving. So that is basically, I agree with that, and that is what I stated right up front when I talked about inflation. My only issue was that when you look at the cost of living, when you visit the markets and the shops and just talk to people, the cost of living is increasing very significantly. I made the point that these major increases in the prices of some of the items I was asking about in some of the markets nonetheless did not necessarily mean that you could not have had single-digit inflation. But somehow that has been ignored in this whole story.
But has the government achieved single-digit inflation?
Well, that is for everybody else to judge. My point.
Do you doubt that they have achieved single-digit inflation?
My point is that the single-digit inflation that we are seeing is not consistent, in my opinion, humble opinion, that is not consistent with developments that we are seeing in the cost of living. The single-digit inflation is supposed to be driven by food prices. So, ask every, woman, man who goes to the markets and ask about food prices between last year and this year and see how food prices have been increasing. My visits to the markets, whether it's in Malatar or Tamale or wherever, suggest that food prices are really going up. That is clear. In Bolga market, for example, as I pointed out in my lecture, maize, a staple, maize, where we eat tozafi every day from maize, went up by 60% within just the last year, more than 100% in Accra. So the point is that when you look at the cost of living, the benefits of a single-digit inflation rate doesn't seem reflected in the cost of living. When you look at interest rates.
What is interest rate?
Well, interest rate is just the opportunity cost of money, or in a sense, the return to holding an asset that will yield that to an asset in terms of investment. But it's really the opportunity cost of holding money which you could have invested for a return. All right. So if you put your money in the bank account or in a treasury bill, you are paid an interest rate or a yield on your investment. Now, what we are saying is that we normally should expect a relationship, which I showed has tended to exist between inflation and interest rates. We haven't seen that recently.
Who is the custodian of these inflation figures? If, for instance, I wanted to make an independent assessment.
Well, we all rely on the Ghana Statistical Service to do that.
The Ministry of Finance relies on them as well?
Yes.
So when finance comes to tell us that inflation is single digit, they're actually telling us what Statistical Service has said?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the Statistical Service that produces.
And it is this Statistical Service that the NDC say that you are denigrating, you don't respect them.
Well, that again I find very amusing, because right in my speech I make it very clear, that we should not, and I do not, impugn the integrity of the hardworking people at the Statistical Service. They do a very tough job. If you have been to the Statistical Service, you would realize that it is a service that has very dedicated people, and but they are very under-resourced. They are very under-resourced.
They are not paid well?
Well, in terms of the resources to do the sort of work that they need to do, a lot of the work is you rely on donor funding to do a lot of the work that they do. But they do a good job. And I stated very clearly, but that does not mean that if you see numbers that don't seem to make sense to you, you don't raise questions simply because you are very, you are quite supportive of the Ghana Statistical Service and what they do and what. But if you see issues, you should raise those issues. And it's actually in the interest of the Statistical Service that we raise this.
Are you throwing a challenge to the inflation figures?
All I'm saying is that we may not be capturing, and I actually, point this fact out, that we may not be capturing what is actually happening. This is why I asked which markets
Can I also find out the inflation for myself? Which foodstuffs? I hear there's something called the basket of goods. Which foodstuffs go into that? How do I go about it?
I think it's a very it's a very large basket. If I recall, you have probably over 240 items in it, which is really based on the living standard surveys and so on.
So we go to show you what people check the prices of all of these.
Yes.
It may include maize, it may include rice, it may include milk and all of that.
Right.
So we check the price of all of these.
Right.
Then
from
we
month
compare
to month.
it to last month.
That's right. From month to month.
Then we look at the percentage increase.
And we look at this percentage increase. That is in very simple
then
terms.
We say that
because you
have
to
average,
aggregate these into an index and see how the index moves from one month to the other, or
in the
on
more
an
simple,
annual basis.
the more simple terms, preliminary, we look at the average of the increase. So if I see that all of these goods that I've put together in this my basket have increased by 10%, then the conclusion is that inflation is at a 10% rate?
That's in simple terms, yes.
Is it this month, May, against last month?
Yeah, you can
or
do a
May
month
this
and month.
year or to May last year?
Yeah, you can do a month increase from one month to the other, which is reported. You can do a year-on-year increase from this time last year to this year, which is a year.
What do we do in Ghana?
We do both. I mean, it's reported.
So what is reported? Is it month on month? Is it year on year?
But in terms of a lot of the headline inflation that we read tends to be a year-on-year inflation, right? The headline. When you say that March 2012, for example, we had 8.8% inflation. That was against March 2011 in terms of the movement. So that's essentially what we have.
So you are raising doubts about the figures that we have?
Well, I am saying that Ghanaians are the best judge of this, but I am saying that the movements, when I expect to see, when you have a major depreciation taking place in your currency and your exchange rate is so stable, it raises questions in my mind as to why that is the case. What suddenly has gone wrong? Yeah. When the interest rate doesn't seem to be reacting. I'm talking of the average bank lending rates. Don't seem to be reacting to this sustained single-digit inflation over 22 months, he said, or more. You ask questions when the cost of living doesn't seem to be behaving in a way that is consistent with single-digit inflation. Then you ask, what is it for? You can't. It doesn't help your cost of living. It doesn't help your interest rates. It doesn't help exchange rate stability. It doesn't help job creation. So practically, what are we trying to get single-digit inflation for?
Fifi Kwete, the Deputy Minister of Finance,
Right.
On your famous, for some people, infamous for others, the Midonyami exchange rate. And he said that you had grossly misunderstood the situation. You had misread it, because he said there has been a production of the cedi because of the wage bill. The implementation of single spine, he said, had occasioned a wage bill from 2 billion to about 5 billion. And he also talked about the oil industry. That's on the cedi side,
Right.
and therefore the supply side. In the oil industry, the importation of heavy oil equipment into Ghana, and so on the dollar side, there has been that kind of constellation which would naturally put pressure on the cedi. He claims that you have not understood that. So you are talking about Midonyami and this and that.
Well, I don't understand him. We've always had use for foreign exchange in this country for investment and so on. I don't think
But would it shoot up
is
if
coming to
they are bringing in
bring in equipment and coming to source foreign exchange from Ghana to bring in their equipment for which they would make most of the profits. I don't think it makes sense for that. I mean, I can see that if our imports are going up because of, in statistical terms, but I don't think that they are coming to the Bank of Ghana to say, you know, we are a major oil investor in Ghana and we need to bring in equipment and you should therefore give us.
But if they are
Forex.
bringing foreign exchange, doesn't it pass through Bank of Ghana? Wouldn't it go through our system and create an excess supply of the foreign currency?
Well, I mean, in terms of the export receipts, I mean, the oil is exported just like cocoa and so on. We get our share.
On the balance, which will be more at this time. On the balance of what we are getting from the oil and what the oil people need, the equipment that they are bringing in, how much dollar they will need to circulate around.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure, but I'm just saying that whatever they need to source their own forex to do. I will be very surprised if they are coming in, unless it is GMPC which is doing that investment and needs forex to do it or whatever. But you know, we've been at this since 2010 or before. You know, the production, the process to production should have been when you were doing a lot of your investments, for example. And why are we seeing this all of a sudden? It doesn't seem to make sense.
What about the wage bill that he said single spine has occasioned the wage bill increase from 2 billion to 5 billion? The wage bill, the money they are paying, salaries.
So basically,
they are turning out more cedis.
So shouldn't we, if you have more cedis, and that shows a certain lack of understanding. If you really did have more cedis circulating, as he has said, and it may actually, it is likely to be the case, shouldn't that transmit into prices before it hits the exchange rate?
I don't understand. How does that transmit to prices?
Well, if you have more money, don't you buy goods with it?
Yes, people have more cedis.
Precisely.
The workers have more money.
Precisely.
Yes.
So this is why money causes inflation.
Okay.
And this is why inflation causes the exchange rate to depreciate. What we are seeing is a missing link. The money has not caused inflation, but it has caused the exchange rate to depreciate.
I get the point you're making.
You see, so this is exactly the
So
missing
you were saying
link.
that if there has been that payment to civil servants,
Yeah.
they will be using it to buy goods.
Precisely.
And therefore there will be a lot of money chasing few goods.
Yeah, so
Natural
people-
inflation should shoot up.
Precisely. So
But that hasn't
Kwete
happened.
should go back and understand this whole transmission process. I don't want to get
So why is the
personal,
currency?
but I think,
Why is the currency behaving like that?
well, I
in
think
your own estimation?
I give a few reasons for why we should expect this currency. I don't find it surprising, quite frankly, given the record, the economic management record that we have seen. It's not surprising at all.
Are you pointing to incompetence?
No. I'm just saying that it's not surprising. You can competently do something that turns out to be very wrong in your own own view, right? I mean, that nobody's going to, but I'm just saying that, you know, it didn't quite add up, you know. So there are a few issues that are resulting in exchange rate depreciation. Fundamentally, what I've said is that the fiscal monetary policy mix is usually fundamental in looking at exchange rate depreciation issues, right? I mean, you talk about a lot of imports relative to exports and so on. But if your fiscal policy generally is loose.
What is fiscal, please?
Which is government spending.
Government